as we go through the section today. Keep in mind that if you have a question, if I go too fast, if I skip over something that you wanted me to talk about, just go ahead and unmute or put it in the chat. I have the chat visible so I can reference it. I I don't really like a whole lot of lecture. I think it's more interesting to be interactive, but it's just hard in this platform, and we do have a lot of material. So I don't want you to think that I just need to go full steam and deliver information, and you don't have an opportunity to jump in there if you have questions. So feel free to do that. Let me see. I'm going to go to the website real quick. So just a reminder, hopefully you bookmarked this site at least until next week. An update on tech and stuff like that. I think by Monday you should have access to the Blackboard, and so these first couple weeks will be already in there, and you'll be going to week 3. But I don't know if it's Monday or Tuesday. Classes officially start on Tuesday at the college because Monday is Martin Luther King Junior Day. So anyway, we're going to be switching over to that platform between this week and next week. So, but I put the 3rd week on here just so that we have a little bit of an overlap. I do have access now to the system that we use at STC for the syllabus. So the syllabus has been prepared, and I'll go over that with you when we have access to the Blackboard platform. In terms of technology at the East Campus, it seems like there's been some improvement. They sent an email over the weekend about how they are cleaning all of the computers on campus, like wiping the memory and doing whatever they have to do to make them available to go back onto the network. There were a lot of corrupted computers, and it's every school in the district, so they're working on that. They gave us some, they asked us to do some preventative things on any computers that we might have at home. So I don't know, we might be back at school next week if that works out. The gradebook has been up and down. When it's up, they say don't use it. You log into it and it says, it's still in recovery mode. And so basically I just close back out of it. So both of those things I think are a little, glimmer of hope that we'll be back to having all our systems online soon. But, you can keep checking your portal. Obviously, as soon as I have access to it and I'm cleared to go ahead and put in the first semester final grades and stuff, I'll do that. And that should calculate your final grades for East. They told us that once the system's up, they were going to give us 2 days to go in and make sure everything's right and nothing was corrupted or missing, and input any grades that we had for the final for 3rd 6 weeks. So maybe that will happen this week or early next week, hopefully. That's where we are with that. Okay, so today we are on week 2, and we're going to be talking about the ending part of Beowulf. Before we do that, I just wanted to make sure that you had a chance to look at this Middle Ages background. This is like 25 pages from the textbook distilled down. I did not write this. They came up with it in the, for the curriculum, for the course from the department. I think it's sufficient. If there's anything here, like if you read it and you're really confused, you might want to go to the textbook and read those 22 pages, 25 pages. The page numbers are here at the top. But basically, it's just sort of like refreshing your memory about medieval times. We're moving from the Anglo-Saxon this week into the Middle Ages. We'll be looking at 2 pieces from the Middle Ages and then continuing on. But this has some good background just to refresh your memory. And it's got a little bit of a literary, angle to it. So there's some information about Beowulf. A lot of it I already talked about with you. There's a list here of terms. I'll tell you right now that there are questions on the midterm that reflect this sort of summary. background information. So if there's a list here of terms, those show up on the midterm. I did not write the midterm. They want me to use their midterm, but I have looked at it. So I can tell you that the way that it's set up is that it randomizes through a set of terms that you have to write short responses for. And I know it's early. We're not taking the midterm until March, but I'm just telling you in terms of your preparation and your studying that the test is set up so that there's a bank and there's a number of questions that you have to write a few sentences explaining the significance of that thing. But it rotates through, like you might have to do 10 of those, but there are 50 in the bank. So what 10 you get is random when you take the exam. But these are some of the terms that are in that list of 50. So I'm not saying that these terms will be on the exam. I'm saying that they're a possibility for the exam. Hopefully that makes sense. And all the stuff that's on this page. So this is a good one to take notes from. It's not terribly long, but there are terms that I went back and I put them into this list so that you could highlight them and make sure that you understood them. But I wanted to take a few minutes if there are any questions about any of these terms, especially the ones that are here in Beowulf, because I've talked about pretty much all of these, or else they're listed up here in this description. So are there any questions about any of these terms? Everybody's good? Okay. Okay. Then you should read on. We're going to talk about the first part of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight on Thursday. So there's a little bit of background here. Obviously, I haven't talked about any of these elements yet because I'll talk about them as we study that piece. But just in terms of your own note taking, you probably want to have those terms listed out for yourself so that you can study later. I'll probably make a study guide for you too, so that you can, I'll list all this stuff in one place right before the exam, a couple weeks ahead of time, so that you can review. But we'll talk about those as we go on to the next section. All right, so I'm going to switch over to Beowulf then. This, I've been annotating the PDF in Cami. I highly recommend it. It took me a little while to, there's always a user, learning curve, but I found it pretty handy. So I'm going to go through the sections that you were supposed to read for today, and just talk about the significance of some of the parts. We'll go through it in order, so it'll be a little sequential, but there's some parts that you did not need to read, and I want to go back and talk about what's in them. You're not responsible for this stuff in the skip part. I put some red signals there so that I would remember that you didn't need to read these parts. But I do want you to understand what's in those parts. So there's this section between the section that we left off on Thursday and today's section, and there's another section in the middle that you skipped. And the reason they skipped that is because there's a lot of flashback, and there's a lot of sort of like genealogical stuff in there, and they just decided that you didn't need that. Of course, you can go back and read it if you want, but I'm just gonna go through it. We left off on Thursday with Beowulf having defeated Grendel, and then the next section that you can skip is called Celebration at Heorot. So obviously Beowulf has the arm of Grendel. Everybody recognizes that he was successful in defeating the monster, and so they have a big feast for him. They are happy that they're relieved from the grief of this monster. So everybody comes and wants to look at the arm and congratulate Beowulf and all that stuff. And he sort of repeats for Hrothgar, because Hrothgar and the Danes were not present when Beowulf defeated Grendel. So he sort of tells them what happened. Um, and they have this big party. Hrothgar invites in this minstrel who comes to sing a couple of different songs. And one of them that he sings is the story of Sigmund, who was a dragon slayer. And so Beowulf is kind of compared to this ancient hero of theirs that was able to kill a dragon, which is a little foreshadowing because now we know that at the end of Beowulf, Beowulf actually does slay a dragon. But you know, they're drawing a comparison between his deed and this ancient story of their ancestor. So they're eating and drinking, and he's given a lot of gifts. Hrothgar showers him with gold and horses and chainmail and armor and all this stuff, thanking him. And they make some speeches and not all that sort of thing. This is where he gets some prizes and stuff, right around line 1020. I should point out that these people don't have a monetary system. They have like some rudimentary coins, but basically everything is paid for in items or barter. So when Beowulf gets all this stuff, he's not going to keep it. He's going to give it to his king and as tribute, right? So he's going to win all of this for his king, and it increases his value to the king, and it also sort of fortifies his people because they get to have this treasure in their bank account, right? And so the king has this treasury, and Beowulf is contributing it. So he's not really going to keep all of those things. If the king wants to, King Hygelac, when he goes back home, the king can give him some stuff and, you know, say thank you for your hard work or defeating all these beasts. But he's given them, but the idea is that he's going to give them to his king. That's just how it worked. I like taxes. Okay, so then there's another song that the minstrel sings, and it's a song about revenge and grief. It's an old story about Hildebert and Finn. And in the story, what happens is Hildebert is a princess, and she's married. She's a Danish princess, and she's married off. And they're, you know, to kind of stop the fighting between two groups of people, but it doesn't work. It backfires, and there's a war anyway, and they pretty much all die. Even Hildebert, her brother, her husband, her son, they all get killed in this skirmish. And so it's a song about grief, and it's a foreshadowing because it sort of foreshadows the coming of Grendel's mother, and it's coming up. So it's long, and I can see why they had you skip that, but you can identify it because there's this italics and this weird spacing. It's because the bard is singing all of this at the dinner that they're putting on, this festival that they're putting on for Beowulf. The queen, Walstheo, comes and gives him some stuff. She doesn't come out too often, so I highlighted it, but she comes in, she greets him and thanks him and gives him some, you know, mead, and she also later on gives him this special torque, this neck piece. And then there's this foreshadowing that happens. So foreshadowing is kind of a prominent device in this work. After she talks to Beowulf, there's this line: she moved then to her place, men were drinking wine at that rare feast. How could they know fate, the grim shape of things to come, the threat looming over many thanes as night approached and King Hrothgar prepared to retire to his quarters. So that part is like suggesting they're enjoying themselves, but what they don't know is that they're not finished. And the threat of Grendel is quelled, but not other threats, because Grendel had a mama and she is not happy that her little baby got killed. Okay, so that's just summing up the part that you skipped over. So then this is the part that you should have read. There's the attack with Grendel's mother coming, and she comes in a swifter manner than Grendel. She is fueled with grief and revenge because these men killed her son. And so she comes to the mead hall, and that night, Beowulf isn't there, Hrothgar isn't there, so it's just a bunch of men. They think they're safe now in the mead hall because Grendel, the threat, has been eliminated. And so she comes in and she wreaks havoc on the men in the mead hall. They're all drunk, of course, because of the feasting that they've been doing. And it says here, I like this line a lot because it brings up the idea of the Amazon warrior from mythology. So, her onslaught was less only by as much as an Amazon warrior's strength in less than an armed man's, when the hefted sword, its hammered edge and gleaming blade slathered in blood, raises the sturdy boar ridge off a helmet. So the comparison there to an Amazon warrior, it's because she's female. The Amazons were a tribe of women warriors. They didn't have any men in their ranks. If they Well, I don't know if I should tell you the story of the Amazon warriors. It's kind of unsettling. Might be too early in the morning for Amazon talk. But in mythology, the Amazons were a race of warrior women. They piggyback off of that. Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah, I'm not going to say. Maybe I shouldn't tell you, and then that's mean. So maybe you get a glimpse of it. They used the legend in the Wonder Woman origin in the recent movies and stuff. So but the Amazon legend from mythology is this group of warrior women, and they're fierce. They're like the scariest warriors that exist. They train all the time, and yeah, like yeah, well, what the comic book element of Wonder Woman uses the Amazon mythology that goes back to ancient, Greek and Roman mythology. They piggyback off of it. But Wonder Woman, yeah, she's like an Amazon warrior, but light compared to the legend. So these women they were so fierce about their fighting that they would eliminate anything that got in their way. And I don't know, how can I say this? If you're wielding a weapon, say you've got a javelin or you've got a bow and arrow that you're using, the girls will know this. You have a little something that's going to get in the way. If you've ever tried to swing a baseball bat or a golf club or anything like that with any kind of chesticles, as my niece likes to call them, she's 12, they get in the way. So they sliced one off so that they could be better warriors. The other one they kept because they needed to, nurture their children and, feed them. So this is a race of all women. They would descend upon towns and sex up the men. I mean, they needed to procreate. So they would sex up the men and either kill them or just leave. And when they gave birth, they would either they would kill the boy children and so that they could just have a race of females. Yeah, so they're pretty fierce. So when this reference in the story is to the Amazon warrior, that's the image you're supposed to get in your head. And an Amazon warrior who's calm is fierce. But here's one that is angered by, yeah, exactly, woman power. I like that. Here's one that's angered by the death of her son. So she is enraged. And so the comparison there is supposed to bring to mind the most screeching, horrible hell fiend that you can possibly imagine. And she comes into this mead hall and she's bloodthirsty. She ends up getting startled and she grabs this one guy, Ashera is his name, and grabs him up and leaves the mead hall with him. It turns out that he was a trusted advisor of Hrothgar. And Hrothgar is pretty upset when he finds out that Ashera has been killed. Beowulf, after she leaves, they come over, everybody knows something happened. They come over to the mead hall. They see the destruction and blood spatters and all that stuff. And Hrothgar immediately is, crippled with grief. He says, "Rest, what is rest? Sorrow has returned." Like, we only had not even a day to enjoy the freedom of not having these monsters over us, and now it's back again, like it's returned. Ashera is dead. He was a soulmate to me. Now, when he says that, I know that our 21st century idea of soulmate is a romantic thing, but that's not what he means. He means that this was the guy that he went through, life with in terms of battles and decisions, and he was his, advisor. And now that that guy's been brutally slain, he is just beside himself with grief. And I think that it's worth pointing out that Hrothgar is older. The older we get, sometimes the more sentimental we get. Beowulf is not sentimental about it at all. Of course, he didn't really know the guy. But Hrothgar goes on for a while, upset about this terror that has occurred. And he says, we have to go and get her. We have to avenge Ashera. And so he describes where Grendel's mother's lair is. I've heard that it's, out on the moors by this fen and this creepy, like marsh area. There's a bunch of creatures that like intermix with each other, and there's all kinds of serpents. And I think that's where she lives. And so he employs Beowulf. I mean, you got the guy right there who just killed Grendel. You might as well utilize him to take care of the mother too. So he says, seek it if you dare. Now, of course, Beowulf will want to, and because it will further his legend. The next section is Beowulf fights Grendel's mother, but this time he has to go to her lair. In the first battle, Grendel came to the mead hall, and so Beowulf was kind of on his own home territory. It wasn't his mead hall, but it was, the human environment. This time, Beowulf is going to go and find Grendel's mother in her territory, sort of like home field advantage, right? And he's never been there before. He doesn't know what it's like under this weird, bloody lake. So it's like sort of a level up for his heroism. It was one thing to kill Grendel, and that seemed great at the time, but now this battle shows even more of his ability as a leader and as a hero. But before that happens, Beowulf responds to Hrothgar's grief and basically has to lecture him and say, look, you need to get over all that crying stuff. We have to go get her. He says, wise sir, do not grieve. It is always better to avenge dear ones than to indulge in mourning. So he basically says, okay, Hrothgar, you need to man up. I'm going to go take care of this monster for you. You just need to dry your tears and try to be kingly, because your people don't need to see you bawling your eyes out about some guy. So he says, bear up and be the man I expect you to be. Now that is a reversal. Remember, Beowulf's the young guy here. Hrothgar is the tried and true, grizzled, old, battle-weary king. And so he has to kind of tell Hrothgar, I'm going to go get her. I'm going to go find this troll dam, he calls her. I love that. I wish I had known that whenever I was mad at my mom. I would have called her a troll dam. I love my mom. I'm not mad at her, but when you're a teenager and you're mad at your mom, that's mean. I know. Well, I wouldn't. I'm just saying, I wish I had known. You shouldn't call your mom a troll dam. I don't think you should. Anyway, he says, I guarantee you she will not get away. He's right away, I'm going to go get her for you. All you have to do is sort of pull yourself together over there. Bear up and be the man I expect you to be. These people need a king. So then he springs to his feet, praised God, of course, because the show had to fit that in there. And then he says, let's go. And they follow the monster's tracks and the gory pieces of Ashera back to her lair. I know that sounded kind of creepy the way I laughed when I said that, but it's just so it's so overwhelmingly perfect. So they follow this trail of blood and pieces back to where the home of Grendel's mother, and all of the weird offspring of Cain's clan. And they get to this dismal, like bloody marsh, and they can see serpents like slithering in it, and it's really terrifying. It's sort of like all the trees are dead around there, and it's just miserable. And it describes all of that, but Beowulf just starts putting on his battle gear. That's another difference between this battle and the battle with Grendel. Remember, with Grendel, Beowulf was like, well, I'm going to fight her the way she fights. I'm going to fight him the way he fights. And so he doesn't use any weapons, he doesn't use any armor. But this time he puts on his armor, he gets out his chainmail, he does all that stuff because he doesn't really know what to expect. He didn't even see her when she came to the mead hall. He was somewhere else. So he's going to use all of his tools. And he gets ready mentally, physically, and so on. And then Unferth comes and brings him his sword, which is probably him apologizing for his previous behavior. He says to the men, or to Hrothgar, he says, if this combat kills me, take care of my young company, my comrade in arms, and be sure also, my beloved Hrothgar, to send Higelac the treasures I received. Higelac, remember, is his king and his uncle. So he says he's very, very aware that he might die in this battle, but he's going to take it on so that he can advance his legend. So then he just sort of jumps in, doesn't know what to expect, doesn't know what's going to happen. And that is some bold action. He doesn't know how big she is. He doesn't know the lay of the land, but she does. It's her territory. So just think about how much heroism is involved in that act. Immediately she finds him and she starts like ripping at his skin and at his chainmail and his armor, and she's got these huge talons that she's using, and it's a fight. He almost loses. She pins him down right away, and his sword, like he tries to poke at her with this sword that Unferth gave him, and it breaks right away. It's no good. I made a note here, she's a formidable opponent. You even had this line, he surely would have perished, except that God ordained that he would be successful. So the idea that God intervened because of his goodness and the fact that he was trying to rid the world of this menace puts him on the good side, and so he is rewarded with the victory. And it sort of happens in what we call, this is not a term that will be on the exam. I put it in here though, because maybe you've heard this before, Deus ex machina. Deus ex machina is a term that we use in literature, and it means like, from the Latin, it means God in the machine. And so we use that term whenever something happens that's kind of like too good to be true, or it solves a problem, but it's just because, oh, then he woke up from his nightmare, or something kind of fantastical. And so that happens in this fight. Beowulf is down, his sword didn't work, Grendel's mother has him pinned, and then he sees this magical sword. He goes into her armory, he gets this magical sword, and it's basically the only thing that could possibly kill her. And he beheads her with it pretty quickly. So Deus ex machina there is the idea that magically this sword appeared and it was the one thing that could defeat her. So otherwise he was going to die. So he dealt her death blow and cut off her entire head. All the people that are waiting, I think this is kind of funny, but all the people that are waiting, all they can do is see the blood that's like bubbling to the surface, and they don't know if it's Beowulf's blood, Grendel's mother's blood, some creature's blood, they don't know. So they're waiting there, and they wait for a long time. Hrothgar's men waited and went home thinking that he was dead. But Beowulf's men know better, so they wait. And he, sure enough, goes and he gets Grendel's head, and because he finds Grendel's body, minus the arm, and he cuts off Grendel's head. He always wanted the head. He even says to Hrothgar, I'm sorry I couldn't get you his head. And so he gets the head and he brings the magic sword hilt, which is just the handle part. The blade part melted. I think I highlighted that. Yeah. There's this supernatural thing where the blood of Grendel's mother like is so toxic that it melts the sword. And so all he has is the handle and Grendel's head. And he swims up to the top. I don't know how you swim holding a monster head and a sword, but Beowulf can do it. So he swims up to the top and he, pierces the surface of the water, and victory. He's got these souvenirs that he brings with him back. And so there's this second victory, but there are some differences between those two. And I think it's good to kind of in your mind compare and contrast those two battles, because each battle that Beowulf has ramps up his hero status. I mean, you're not a hero if you kill a chipmunk. You have to kill something pretty awesome to become a hero. And so he kills Grendel, and then how are you gonna do better than that? Well, kill Grendel's mother in her own lair. Well, how are you gonna do better than that? Well, I'll kill a dragon when I'm 80 years old. That kind of thing. So so his legend, like to maintain your legendary status, you would have to keep increasing the difficulty level of your tasks, and he effectively does that. So then they talk about the astonishing sight. It takes like a bunch of guys to carry that head, even though Beowulf swims up with it perfectly fine. Okay, so then there's a big long section that you got to skip. I'll just tell you what happened. So they have another celebration. Obviously, they're happy that there's been retribution for the death of a sharer. Hrothgar showers Beowulf with a lot more stuff. And they thank him, profusely. They have another feast. And then Beowulf says, okay, I need to go home. I need to take all this stuff back to my king. And so they do that. They plunged the keel and they went back from Denmark. There's a story about this queen. So when they get back, Beowulf goes immediately to his king, Hygelac. If you remember from that family tree, let me go to it real quick. Hopefully you're using that resource as you're reading, because it helps you visualize who's related to who. So Beowulf leaves Denmark and goes back to Geatland or Geatland, and immediately goes to tell Hygelac what happened and bring all the treasure. Of course, he's very excited to give all this treasure to his king and talk about all the things that he did, because it elevates his status in society. And now he's a true warrior with all these treasures and so on and so forth. So he goes back and and tells them everything that happened. There's this Queen Hygd, Hygd. I think she's on that pronunciation list. Yeah, here it is right here. She is the wife of Hygelac, the queen of the Geats. And so she's there, and they do this whole thing about how gracious she is, and they contrast her with this queen in a little bit of flashback. I only mention that because the women in this story are few and far between. So I'm mentioning that in there. They're very mild-mannered and subservient. And some of them don't even have names. So like Grendel's mother doesn't have a name. She's just Grendel's mother. Like they couldn't name her Brunhilde or something, and she just has to be Grendel's mother. So Hygelac is very anxious to hear about what happened. Beowulf faithfully repeats everything that occurred. He doesn't exaggerate, he doesn't tell a fish tale, where it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. He tells the story and he says, here's all the treasure. And Hygelac gives him a bunch of it back and, says thank you. And then some time goes by. So those first two battles and all of the stuff that happens as a result is in Beowulf's youth. Some stuff happens where over the next 50, 60 years, Beowulf eventually becomes king and rules for about 50 years. So when we get to the second part of and the final battle that Beowulf has, we're talking about an old Beowulf at this point. There are some flashbacks in the text that go back to explain like how Beowulf became king. Some of the other family members had to die first. For example, when Hygelac dies, he dies in battle. His brother Hathkin becomes king because Haribald died in an accident. Hathkin killed him accidentally. There's a reference to that, and I'll get to it a little bit later on because Rethel, this really disturbs him when that happens. So Hygelac's brother becomes king. He dies in a war, and then Hardred, Hygelac's son, becomes king. They offer it to Beowulf first because Hardred's like a kid. They offer it to Beowulf, but he says, no, that's not proper. Let Hardred become king and I'll mentor him. And then Hardred dies in battle, and so Beowulf becomes king. And so in this part that we're skipping over, it says a lot was to happen in later days, the fury of battle. So there's a lot of stuff that happens, and there's some flashbacks and so on. But suffice it to say that Beowulf gets old. He rules for 50 years. Nobody attacks them. I mean, nobody wants to attack the guy that was able to kill Grendel and Grendel's mother. So they're relatively living in peace, which is odd for barbaric times. And he makes it safe for them to go about living and so on. And then this dragon wakes up. So now Beowulf is how old? Well, let's just say he's 20 when he kills Grendel and Grendel's mother. I mean, I can't really go much younger than that. He doesn't become king right away, so figure that's another at least 10, maybe 15 years. So now he's 35. Then he rules for 50 years, so now he's in his 80s. So when we see Beowulf at the end here, he's old. He's been through many battles. He was at all those battles where his relatives died before he became king. And now he's been ruling for a long time in peace and comfort. But now the threat comes in the form of a dragon. And there's an origin element here where they explain why the dragon gets mad and how the dragon built his hoard of treasure. So after 50 years, Beowulf has this dragon awaken in his kingdom. And the reason that the dragon awakes is because this dumb guy stumbles into the dragon's cave. It was an empty cave and the dragon just took it over and like the treasure. And this dumb guy stumbles in there and steals something of the dragon's, and the dragon, like one goblet or something. And the dragon gets all, territorial and angry and starts attacking and dive bombing the village with his fire breath. There is another flashback right here. And if you have your text, you might note it. It's the song of the last man. So even before the dragon moved into this cave, there's an even older story of how the treasure got to the cave, because the dragon did not amass the treasure. The dragon was looking for a new home, I guess, and said, oh, treasure. I guess dragons like treasure. And moved into the cave. The treasure got there because this guy, they call him the last man. This guy was the last of his people. And he had all the treasure of his people. And he puts it in this cave because what else can he do with it? The people are gonna die out with him. And he puts it in this cave, and the dragon comes later. Now this is foreshadowing because the same thing is going to happen at the end of Beowulf. Beowulf does not provide properly for his people. He thinks that he does, but he doesn't. And very soon after Beowulf's death, the Swedes are going to come and take them and just take over their territory, which they do. And that's why Geatland is not on the map today, but Sweden is. So anyway, so there's this song of the last man, this guy, it's a sad song about how, I'm returning to the earth, what was mined from it previously. This is the last treasure of my people. And so this is all just explaining. It's interesting because it's a foreshadowing within a flashback. I guess I should have put that in there for the other classes. Just so I remember. So as they're telling this story of the last man, we find out at the end that the Geats are going to encounter the same thing. I don't know, but the text on this part of the PDF is kind of weird. Okay, so then this is all just describing how this is where the dragon found this cave and said, "Oh, awesome treasure, I'm moving in." And he moves in, he lives there for, generations, however long dragons live. And then he gets mad when this guy comes and steals his treasure, a piece of his treasure, and so he starts burning all of the villages. And now Beowulf has to deal with this foe. He hasn't had to deal with any outside human foes, but now he has to deal with this dragon, which is kind of tough. I mean, dragons have that fire breath. How do you fight that? They've got scales and all that. What are you going to do? So at first Beowulf says he's not going to do anything about it, but then the dragon starts burning down the villages, and then it burns down his own house, and he's like, okay, this dragon has to go. So here's the part where he says that he was not really very worried. He had scant regard for the dragon as a threat, no dread at all of its courage or strength, for he had kept going often in the past, through perils and ordeals of every sort, after he had purged Hrothgar's hall, triumphed in Herod, and beaten Grendel. Like, he just remembers, but I'm Beowulf, so I'm not worried about this little dragon situation. But then, and there's some more flashback where he talks about some of the battles that he was in. And that's a big feature of Anglo-Saxon literature, is the flashback. And the reason that they're inserting all of this battle stuff is the same reason that they say son of Ecgtheow. It's remembering their history. And so whenever they can do a flashback and say, just like the son of so-and-so did that, it's just them finding a way to keep their history remembered. They talk about Nanella and the Swedes and all of the trouble that was with them. Many a skirmish I survived when I was young, and many times of war I remember them well. He talks about when he was little, so there's some flashback there. We get to the actual, okay, so I did put a note in here, the grief of Hrethel. So this is about when Hrothgar's brother kills his other brother, which kind of goes along with Cain. He does not, it's an accident. He does not kill him on purpose. It's with an arrow. He accidentally kills him. But the father of the two is beset by grief, and that's recalled here. And so here's the fight. Beowulf attacks the dragon. So Beowulf decides, you just picture an 85-year-old guy. I mean, he's still Beowulf, so I mean, maybe he's got the strength of 10 now or something instead of 30. But he says, now I'm old, but as king of the people, I shall pursue this fight for the glory of winning, if the evil one will only abandon his earth fort and face me in the open. I'm going to kill this dragon just to solidify my fame and save the people. So here's his formal boast, just like he boasted before Grendel. He boasts again before he goes in to fight the dragon. He has men now. He has an army. They're not a very good army. They haven't had much practice because nobody's been attacking them. And when Beowulf says, you guys stay over there, I'm going to take care of this dragon, they do. And they stay over on the side while he fights the dragon. Probably Beowulf wants this to ramp up his heroism here at the end, because if he can defeat this dragon in his old age and save his people and win the treasure, that's like a good way to go out, doing all those things at once. So if he has all this help from all these men, then it's not his glory. So maybe there's a little arrogance there, or what we would call arrogance. He's just trying to build his legend so he can live on. So he goes and he taunts the dragon out, and they have a battle, but it doesn't work out very well. The fire of the dragon is too hot, and it keeps Beowulf from really getting near the dragon hardly at all. When he does get close, his sword doesn't do anything on the scales of the dragon. So he is kind of like pushed back. Then there's this guy, Beowulf. This is pronounced Beowulf, by the way. I know when you look at it, it looks like Wiglaf. You can say it like that, but Beowulf is proper. So he's one of the men that's, you know, over on the side there, and he sees that Beowulf is not going to make it. He's not going to win and will probably get killed. So he says he like makes this speech to the men there. And well, first he goes in and he helps Beowulf out. Yeah, that's right. The speech is a little bit later. He says, and now the youth was to enter the line of battle with his lord, his first time to be tested as a fighter. And he says to the men, let's go. We need to go help Beowulf. He gave us our weapons. He gave us our freedom. He gave us our life. He gave us our, you know, calm existence. And he needs us now. Let's go. And he's sort of like firing them all up. And I love this line. He says, I would rather my body were robed in the same burning blaze as my gold giver's body than go back home bearing arms. I'd rather die defending and helping Beowulf than go back and survive, but Beowulf died. So, you know, he uses these tactics to get these men to come with him, but they don't. He goes by himself. And so Beowulf is the only one to help Beowulf in the defense of this dragon. The dragon bites Beowulf on the neck, which is going to kill him. Not only is he bleeding from it, but also the venom, as dragons have venom, starts seeping into his body and into his bloodstream. So he gets bitten, but while he's dripping blood from that, Beowulf is able to get a belly, you know, stab on the dragon, which distracts the dragon long enough for Beowulf to, you know, give him a death blow. So without Beowulf, it's questionable whether Beowulf would have defeated the dragon at all. So the dragon dies. Beowulf takes a while to die. He does not die immediately, and he says to Beowulf, go and get some of that treasure, because that treasure is going to save the people. Beowulf knows that when he dies, a lot of foes are going to come and challenge the Geats and try to, you know, overpower them and kill them off and take their land. And so he thinks that this treasure is going to save them, that they'll be able to take this treasure and pay off anybody who might come to attack them. That's not what happens. They end up bearing the treasure with him, and they get attacked. It's not in the story, but we know that there aren't any Geats anymore. So Beowulf says to Beowulf, go and get some of the treasure and let me see it. This is going to sustain the Geats and in my death. He knows he's dying. He says, I want to see that treasure that I fought for. So Beowulf goes running off and gets the treasure and comes back, and Beowulf dies thinking that he's the final savior of his people, not just by killing this dragon, but also by providing for them with this treasure. And they he notices that Beowulf is from the same like original tribe as him, and they're the last men. So when we have that last man stashing the treasure in the cave for the dragon to take over, it's the same idea. Beowulf says, you and I are the last of the Waegmundings, which is like an even older tribe of people, and it's dying out because now they have these other allegiances. But and so then Beowulf dies. His final words are here. Fate, you are the last of us, the only one left of the Waegmundings. Fate swept us away, sent my whole brave highborn clan to their final doom. Now I must follow them. And so those are his last words as he leaves this world. After that, they have a funeral for him. The funeral is different than the funeral that they had for Shield. The the epic poem starts with a funeral and ends with a funeral of two great heroes. Beowulf isn't the only great hero in this story. There's Shield, there's Hrothgar, and there's Welof. So, you know, at different stages in the warrior's development. Beowulf is the one that we kind of follow through his growth, but he's not the only great hero in this text. So he has a hero's funeral. I picked out a few key lines to demonstrate that for you. Before they start the funeral preparations, Welof goes back and really gives those guys, they call them the shirkers because they shirked their responsibility to support Beowulf. I'm sure they were like, well, he told us to stay over here. But he rebukes them and says, you are cowards and you don't even know what you've done. He says that the consequences of their inability to help defend Beowulf are going to ruin the Geat people. He says, so it's goodbye now to all you know and love on your home ground, the open-handedness, the giving of war swords, because Beowulf is dead. Every one of you with freeholds of land, our whole nation will be dispossessed. Because what Welof realizes that these shirkers don't realize is that now they're going to certainly be attacked on all sides by all of the surrounding nations, because now they know that not only is Beowulf gone, but his men are cowards. So it's going to be easy to take over and, you know, take all their land. So you guys don't know that you just signed your own death certificate by not helping Beowulf with this fight. Nobody's going to think we're fierce warriors. Nobody's going to think that we're, you know, going to defend our country at all. So he says, every one of you with freeholds of lands, our whole nation will be dispossessed once princes from beyond get tidings of how you turned and fled and disgraced yourselves. A warrior will sooner die than live a life of shame. So basically, you're not warriors, and we don't really have any warriors. I think some people like to think that Welof is going to be the new king, and maybe he will. It doesn't come out in this story, but not for very long, because pretty soon they're going to be attacked, and with a band of warriors like those guys, they don't stand a chance. He gives them this big old guilt trip. I don't expect that the Swedes are going to even want to make any kind of treaty with us. So, you know, just prepare for the eventual ending. Right around line 3000, he says, now we need to do Beowulf's funeral. And so they do a funeral pyre. Beowulf gave all the directions. I don't know if you read that part. He gave all the directions of where he wanted to be buried and stuff on as he was dying. They get rid of the dragon and they go down and see Beowulf where he is. They get rid of the dragon and then they build Beowulf a funeral pyre, which I put a picture. So it's like a wooden structure, and they would take the body and put it on the wooden structure and burn it over several days. So it's like a cremation, and people would come and watch that happening. And the remains that are left when that fire dies out, they put it into a barrow. I think I put some images in here somewhere. Yeah, here. Here is an image that I put in here of this. I was trying to enlarge it, but I don't know if you could see. This is a funeral pyre. The deceased is here on this platform. There are some offerings that are rent around. So then they light it on fire. They put fuel on it and they light it on fire. And it's, you know, very dramatic way to go and funeral. And then they take his remains and put it in a barrow. I was talking about this earlier. So these ancient people either did the boat thing like they did for Shield, or they did a burning and put the body in a, I can enlarge this, hold on. Move it over here and make it bigger. In a barrow. And there are tons of these burial mounds all over Northern Europe. You could see that they just sort of like heap earth out, and then they'll fortify the inside of that with beams and mud and put the remains of the person with their belongings and, you know, if it's a king, treasure. And that way they have their final resting place. So it's like a grave, but it's like an enhanced grave, or like a crypt, maybe we would think of it. And they would leave them in there. So those still exist, and you can still see them in all over Europe. You can see there's some people in that picture. I don't know if I would go in one, but. So that's what they do. And Beowulf had said that he wanted to be buried in a barrow that was on the headlands. So they bury him in a barrow that looks over the sea on a cliff, so that when people go by, they can say that's the burial spot of the great Beowulf. And the ending is, they said that of all the kings upon earth, he was the man most gracious and fair-minded, keenest to his people, and keenest to win fame. So that is the end of the Beowulf saga. Dun, dun, dun. Roll the credits. That's the end. So I know that I went through that kind of quickly. I'm pretty much at an hour now for going through that ending part. I know that I scrolled through some stuff. So is there anything, you can put it in the chat, anything that you read that I didn't go over? I don't want you to think that only the stuff that I talk about is the stuff that you're responsible for. I'm just kind of like going through the main things. So if there's something that you read that was kind of like, what? Then I want to spend some time talking about that with you if you have questions. So you can pop them up there. I don't see anything right now, but let me talk about Thursday, and then I'll see if there's anything in the chat. So Thursday, I'm going to talk about the first part of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. In your text, there are 4 parts to Gawain. It's a leap forward in time. So we're moving from the Anglo-Saxon into the Middle Ages. So we've got knights and King Arthur and the Round Table and all that sort of stuff. And my earphone's going out. And so there's a shift in time. We're not at the same time as Beowulf when you read that. And you're going to read part 1 and part 4 of Gawain and the Green Knight. On Thursday, I'm going to talk about the first part. And then next Tuesday, I'm going to talk about part 4. So you're only responsible for reading the beginning section and the ending section. Maybe what I'll do on Thursday is talk a little bit, like speed it up and do a little summary of what's in between before you read part 4 for the following Tuesday. On Friday this week, this is the B week. On Friday, I'm going to talk about those 2 works. There's some study questions that we can spend some time talking about. And also, I want to start talking about the discussion question that you have to answer on the 22nd, the very first one. There are 12 of those this term, and I want to make sure that you start off on a good foot. So I'll be spending some time going over that in preparation for you turning that in like a week and a half. So everything's laid out here for you, but Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, the first part, is the next section. It's kind of short, that section, but I'll spend some time on Thursday kind of previewing the middle part so that you're prepared to read part 4 and you're not confused about what's going on. All right, I don't see anything in the chat. So if you have a question, you can also stick around and I'll talk to you about whatever your issue might be. Other than that, I think that's it for today. Hopefully today helped you finalize your ideas about Beowulf. All right, I'll see you on Thursday. Have a good day.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye. Salem, did you have a question?